Welcome to the Unlist. This video idea may be cursed for some people, especially if they're not living inside the United States. But the whole idea of Americana fragrances, patriotic fragrances, July 4th themed fragrances, even though we are past the day, by the time this video goes up, we have already passed Independence Day. But the point is, fragrances that when you smell them, make you think of the United States, Americana, patriotism, celebration of independence, whatever. Now, I'm not saying you have to go hard and be like big flags on the back of a pickup truck or whatever, or wearing an Uncle Sam costume. Anything of that level is a bit extreme, but you can do you. If you want to do that, if you want to be head to toe America fanboy, that's fine. We can get along here. But the general thing being asked for, the general thing being discussed here is fragrances that would evoke imagery of the U.S., Americana, patriotism, all that red, white, and blue stuff, right? So thought it might be a little bit of a neat video idea, something that's not the usual summer fragrances thing, since, everyone does those and they get a little boring. Now, I understand if you don't live in the United States, if you live in the UK, Australia, somewhere in Europe, somewhere in Asia, Mexico, Canada, wherever, this video may not be all that interesting to you because you may not actually care about American culture or American history, politics, whatever. It's fine. It's fine. You can sit this one out. Watch the next one. There'll be more videos, I promise. But for those of you who do have a curiosity itch to scratch, or 25 minutes to kill, whatever, let's talk about it. So for me, personally, obviously, the fragrances I'm going to think about when I think about fragrances that evoke sentiments of Americana, of patriotism, of the U.S. in general, they're going to be brands that either hail from the United States or are extremely popular in the United States, more so than anywhere else in the world. Even if they are French houses, even if they are German houses, whatever the case may be. It's either a fragrance that comes from here, or it's a fragrance that is just so ubiquitous and popular here that people tend to associate it with this country. And also, to a lesser extent, fragrances that tend to evoke more of that blue collar, can-do, pick yourself up by your bootstraps kind of mentality, which that's a bit of an oxymoron because these days our system is so rigged that you can't really pick yourself up by the bootstraps. You got to have someone else give you a helping hand, whether it's a rich relative, family business you can buy into, or some other thing, or you go thousands of dollars into debt trying to acquire degrees that then you never pay off. So whatever, right? The whole bootstrap thing is gone now, but it's a fun sentiment, opportunistic sentiment to have. And there are some fragrances that still kind of evoke that idea of I can be and do whatever I want with myself, right? Land of opportunity. So let's get on with it now. Growing up in Baltimore, growing up in the Mid-Atlantic region in general, a lot of that sentiment boils down to old school drugstore fragrances. That's really your bread and butter, Wonder Bread, mayonnaise, cheeseburger, Chevy pickup, country music type of American person, right? Ball cap, t-shirt, blue jeans, that whole thing. Like we're listening to a Luke Combs song or something, or an old Toby Keith song, rest in peace. That kind of thing usually boils down to a drugstore fragrance, and it's not always one from an American company, but it sometimes is. Sometimes is. Good example of that would be good old-fashioned Clubman Pinot or Canois by Dana. Both of those. That barbershop style that every middle-class barbershop had, mom and pop, old man sitting at the chair waiting for a customer kind of thing. They would always use Clubman or they'd use Canois. Most of them typically did Clubman because it was cheaper. Some of the places might have Canois instead, a little more expensive, because you get that nice French pedigree, because Dana. Now, funnily enough, Clubman Pinot is from the house of Edward Pinot, which was originally a French house, originally considered a bit more prestigious. The house of Pinot goes all the way back to Houbigant, Caron, Guerlain, brands like that. But Pinot had a bit of a downfall right up and around the mid-century. After World War II, they had an American division, and the American division was sold off to a family that then more or less realigned the American division into a drugstore brand, while the actual French house died, just shut down, shuttered, then was opened back up again by various entrepreneurs over the years. But there's no relation between the Edward Pinot house that exists now in France and the Clubman Pinot, which the Clubman Pinot is the only surviving vestige of the original house from centuries ago. And they just make shaving stuff, right? They make the classic Clubman lines. They make the various shave creams and powders and what have you not. I use a lot of that stuff. It's good. Not the best, but it's good. It gets the job done, right? I love the shave foam, even though I know blasphemy. Oh no, you can't. You got to use bowl and brush. But the canned Clubman stuff is really nice. I use it from time to time. So that smell. Ostensibly speaking, it's a French smell because Clubman Pinot itself was a bit of a ripoff of Canois, which came first. Clubman Pinot was launched in 1940, whereas Canois was launched in 1936, 4 years earlier. Jean Carles composed that, and he based his work very heavily off of Fougère Royale by Paul Parquet, who was the owner and perfumer for Houbigant that era. Now, Fougère Royale is much greener, right? A little more aggressive and a little more powdery, also a little more musky. Whereas the Canois is a bit sweeter, more vanillic, has heliotrope in it, carnation, some other things. And the Clubman Pinot excises out the heliotrope, really. There's no heliotrope in the Clubman, but it still retains the vanilla and all the other heavy Tonka stuff. So it has that very rounded sort of shave foamy feel to it anyway, because a lot of shaving products were based off of that, including their own shave foam. But every red-blooded, blue-collar dude, at least back in the 80s and 90s when I was growing up, they all wore that stuff. Is in their cabinet, it's on the sink. It's just what they had. And, Canois was the other one. A little more expensive, like I said. But some people bought it. I mean, it wasn't, by the time I was coming up, it wasn't considered a rich person fragrance. Canois had a period in the 40s, 50s, and 60s where it was considered upper class. Canois was worn by the blue bloods, by the Letterman jacket wearing types, the Jack Purcell shoes. But by the 80s, it was down market. So everyone kind of had it. Another one that I would say definitely would be the Old Spice. The Old Spice is the Americana, the big heavy Americana fragrance. All of the boomers and the silent generation before them and the greatest generation that fought World War II before them, all those guys were wearing Old Spice. It was kind of inescapable. And it's got a very interesting oriental ambery sort of composition. Lots of clove in that fragrance, okay? Lots of cinnamon, other things. To a lot of modern noses, that wouldn't read as a masculine fragrance. It would read as some Old Spiced potpourri handbag kind of thing. But let me tell you what, the guys who wore that, man, they were cigar smoking, they were beer drinking. Like I said, they drove the cars on the Sunday night to Lover's Lake to try and make out with the girlfriend. That's what the Old Spice was all about. And that's a very American thing, You don't see that happening in Europe. Maybe a bit in Canada. I don't know about Mexico. I feel like they have their own stuff down there. But Old Spice would also qualify in my book as a very Americana, very red, white, and blue kind of fragrance. And then, of course, any aftershave from a grocery store, Skin Bracer could slot right on in there. Aqua Velva could slot right on in there. All that stuff really just reeks of American guy, really. Because let's be honest. Let's be honest. A lot of American guys, unless you live in a city like New York or LA or something, or Miami, a lot of American guys, middle America, they're not into fancy designer fragrances. They're not into anything French. You put French on it and they go, oh, they shrivel. They want American. I mean, they don't even want to call their fries French fries. They want to call them freedom fries or whatever. So, you know, you say like Yves Saint Laurent, and they kind of go, whoa, what? Yeah, Yves Saint Laurent, whoa, like that. They just shrivel up. They don't want it. Ralph Lauren, being an American brand, a little different. Polo, the guys come around to Polo. Same thing with Calvin Klein. Calvin Klein being an American brand from New York, same sort of deal. Guys have come around to that. So, you know, lots of Polo, lots of Obsession, lots of Eternity. Very Americana fragrances. More city slicker, immediate suburb, you know, suburban cul-de-sac kind of lifestyle is where you're going to find the Polos and the Eternities. You're not going to find that out in the middle of Tennessee somewhere. If you go out in the middle of Tennessee, it's going to be Old Spice. It's going to be Skin Bracer, or probably nothing, right? That's another thing, is a lot of really red-blooded American guys that live in these small towns, they don't wear any cologne. You're lucky to get deodorant. You're lucky to get aftershave. Otherwise, it's bar soap, and that's it. Bar soap and shampoo, and they don't need no smelly water, dang on it. So that's the thing. America has been a very difficult market to penetrate with fragrances, and we had our day in the sun. You know, 80s and 90s, 2000s was peak for us. We've been kind of downhill ever since. Things are kind of going in reverse again. A lot of American guys are just not really bothered with cologne, you know, or they're the opposite. They're obsessed. There's no middle ground anymore. You've got a bunch of guys that are blue-collar guys, or a bunch of guys that live in the country, drive pickup trucks, don't wear any cologne at all, right? They'd rather smell of motor oil, of potting soil, of poured concrete, whatever. That's what they want to smell like. Then you got the guys who live in the city, and they obsess on TikTok, and they obsess on YouTube, and they have 500 goddamn perfumes in their closet, right? And everything is Parfums de Marly, and everything is Creed. So there's like no in the middle. Never shall the twain compromise and meet in the middle. It's either no perfume at all, or I am a fucking junkie, right? That's America in a nutshell. We live at extremes. Everything is at extremes here. Moderate guy with like 10 bottles, yeah, you're not going to find that. Very rare. So, another one I would say, mostly by virtue of the marketing, would be Tommy Hilfiger, would be the original Tommy cologne, because that fragrance was literally sold as America in a bottle. And all the notes, like American apple pie and open road this and that and the other, silly stuff. I mean, it was composed by Alberto Morillas, okay, Firmenich, and Byzantium, Firmenich. It was originally going to be a fragrance that was submitted for another brief under the Estee Lauder portfolio. I think it was going to be an Aramis fragrance originally, and things got mixed up, and the fragrance that was going to go to Tommy ended up going to Havana instead, and the fragrance that was going to be Havana ended up being Tommy. And yeah, funny story. There's also all kinds of stuff going on there. That one of the fragrances submitted by Harry Fremont for Aramis Havana ended up being used instead by Michael Kors years later, adjusted. You know, the core tobacco accord was meant for Havana, and then it ended up not being for Havana. It ended up going to someone else later on. But point is, that fragrance, Tommy, is kind of like the epitome of men's cologne smell of the 90s. Nautica, which I discussed in the last video, Nautica could also slot in there. Even though Nautica was launched by a Taiwanese entrepreneur, yes, I know, but the brand really was most successful in the United States. So, boom, by virtue of that, it's an American thing. Just like Aramis by Estee Lauder. An American brand, yes, but Aramis was launched all over the world. Aramis was actually launched a year earlier in the UK, in Paris. We didn't get it in the United States until 65, but it was in Harrods in 64, right? They got it a year before us. We got it in 65. So, but still, it ended up being a better seller over here in the United States. And again, a lot of American guys loved Aramis because it was a very big, heavy, ironically very floral kind of fragrance. Okay, it had aldehydes in it. It was a very, very chypre kind of presentation, but it was big and bold. You know, hair on the chest. Guys liked it. Slotted with the American thing. On the same note, I would say Stetson, which, Cody is a French brand, yes, but Cody acquired the license for the Stetson haberdashery. They made hats, Stetson hats. They launched the Stetson fragrance in '81. And that too was a very sort of gender-bendy kind of fragrance. It was a big floral, semi-oriental chypre. I think Stetson has more in common with Chantilly by Houbigant, but they dressed it up as a cowboy fragrance. And by virtue of dressing it up as a cowboy fragrance, it became like the epitome of what Midwestern guys, Texas guys, they all had to wear the Stetson. Don't tell them that it smelled a bit on the feminine side. Don't tell them that, they get upset at you. But it was very popular in the 80s and 90s. I knew a guy that draped himself head to toe in Stetson. It was very, very, very heavy. It made me not like the fragrance for a little while. I came around to it later once he was out of my life. But he was very heavy on the Stetson, and it made me go a little bit. But yeah, it was definitely over-enjoyed by the people who wore it in America. It was very, very much over-enjoyed. Extension of that would be Wild Country, which came first in 1967. And Avon is obviously a very American brand because Avon started here in America. And Wild Country was kind of the first real like cowboy sort of fragrance, the marketing and all that tied into it. But the smell of Wild Country is similar again to Canois, which is a French fragrance. Clubman Pinot, which is by virtue of lineage a French fragrance. The difference with Wild Country was Wild Country had a bit more clary sage in it, a bit more musk in it. It was much more musky and aromatic and less on the floral side. It doesn't have as much. It does have some heliotrope and does have some carnation in it and all that stuff, but it went much more like just harsh tumbleweed kind of vibe. Still a powdery barbershop fougere. It had shave cream, it had bar soap, had all the things, aftershave, all that stuff, but it was a much more dry brush kind of vibe to it than the Canois, than the Clubman Pinot and all that stuff. But it's another one. And then Brut, Fabergé. Technically, Fabergé is Russian, right? Fabergé, Russian house, bought by an American entrepreneur by way of France. So ultimately, Fabergé would become part of Unilever, which is a Lever Brothers company, which is American again. But Fabergé Brut, 1964, Karl Mann composed that. Another real big American fragrance because it was most popular here in the US. I mean, it's sold everywhere, I'm sure. It was also very popular in the UK. So a lot of people may say, hey, no, you can't take Brut. You can't claim that because Brut's very British. A lot of British guys love the Brut. And I'm like, okay, we can share. We can hold hands, sing Kumbaya. We can share the Brut. But it was still very, very popular here in the US. That's really it. There's not a whole lot of modern releases, right? I mean, some new Ralph Lauren stuff maybe, right? But by and large, anything made within the last 24, 25 years, anything made on this side of the 21st century line, not super duper American, right? Most of these American companies really began to try catering more to the European market, catering more to the growing Asian market, kind of left the Americana spirit behind. I mean, there's a couple of stragglers. Kenneth Cole, another New York American designer, very, very popular in the 2000s. One could argue that Kenneth Cole Black and Kenneth Cole New York Men and Reaction and all those things were very American smells because they didn't sell super well outside of the U.S. More of a regional New York brand, though, really. I mean, it sells everywhere, but a little more regional. John Varvatos is another one. John Varvatos actually comes from Calvin Klein. John Varvatos was a Calvin Klein jeans designer. He designed their jeans for a long time. Then he broke away on his own, launched his own clothing line and his own fragrance line in the 2000s. And even though a lot of those Varvatos fragrances are also sold in Europe, a lot of them are composed by Rodrigo Flores-Roux, who's a very good perfumer, but they still tend to just do more here in the U.S. You see John Varvatos they have more of an American vibe, and they have more of an American aesthetic too, with the leather wrap around the bottles and all the wicker and stuff, Some people might say, what about Tom Ford? And then I go, well, what about Tom Ford? Yes, he's from Texas. Being from Texas probably makes him the most American designer I've named yet, right? Just Texas is like Uber America, right? They are so America, they are more American than the rest of the United States, which is why they want to be their own country, I guess. They want to break away because they're just too American for the rest of us Americans, right? They need to go form their own country and call it Super America or something, or America Plus, America 2.0. Whatever their deal is, Tom Ford is from there, and you would think that would make him more American, make his designs more American, but I don't know. He tends to play the French angle a lot. I mean, back when he was with Gucci, right, and YSL, all of his stuff was an homage to French perfumery. I mean, sometimes he would drop a reference like Halston, right? He would do some Halston style fragrances. Halston's also American. Roy Halston Frowick, right? American. But, beyond that, most of his influences, most of the things he draws muse from are French. Beau de Jour, okay? All that stuff, Noir. If he's not riding up the coattails of Caron or riding up the coattails of Guerlain, he's riding up the coattails of Yves Saint Laurent or Hubert de Givenchy or one of those guys. He's really not playing for the home team. And this is no disrespect. I like some of his stuff, but Tom Ford's not really trying to really do the American thing, even though he's from Texas, like I said. It's like he's running away from his heritage. He's chasing. And he's no longer in the game now. He's sold his business. He's retired. He's going to go do whatever it is he's going to do now. He's done anyway. He's just out of here. So it doesn't really matter. But I don't really think Tom Ford fragrances is being all that American to me. Now, one last thing before I sign off here and we roll this video up is Caswell Massey, or Macy, Caswell Massey. The oldest and first really successful perfume house in the United States, formed back when we were still colonies. We weren't even a country yet. When this brand first existed. And the famous number 6, chosen because George Washington chose that bottle, and it was the 6th bottle out of like 15. And then when he was asked, what should we call it? He goes, just keep it number 6. I don't care, right? Because he's George Washington. Why would he care? So it became number 6. That is probably the most patriotic fragrance you can wear. If you want to say, I smell like George Washington, the founder of this country, then you got to wear that, number 6 by Caswell Massey or Caswell Massey, whatever. But that is probably like peak patriotism. That is like red, white, and blue, Uncle Sam, whatever, right? You can kick it up if you want to with your flags and your pickup trucks, but you're a poser unless you have number 6. Number 6 is like the hardcore, super America, right? Like if you live in Texas, you got to have a bottle of number 6. So, all right, guys, you tell me. Fragrances that remind you of America, that remind you of the United States, of the Americana cultural thing, whatever. Some runners-up could include Curve by Liz Claiborne, another one that was mostly popular in the U.S., but I think I've covered most of the good ones, right? You tell me what your thoughts are on this, and I'll catch you next time.